The market of Kethra was always loud. Merchants shouted about their spices, their silks, their metal trinkets that caught the sun and glittered like captured fire. Children darted between stalls with stolen figs in their hands, and old men argued about the proper price of salt, as though the world itself would fall if a single coin was misplaced. To anyone else, the market was a place of noise, barter, and bustle. But to Ilyas, it was also a place of listening. He had always been drawn not to the cries of sellers or the clang of copper vessels, but to the quieter sounds, the slip of voices half forgotten, the murmurs in corners, the languages that did not belong to Kethra at all. On that particular day, with the air thick with dust and the scent of roasting lamb, Ilyas heard something that stopped him in his tracks. It was not loud. In fact, it was hardly more than a whisper, lost beneath the chatter and laughter of 100 people. But it was enough to make his bones feel cold. The sound had no shape he could place, no echo of the languages of his city, nor of the travelers, from the north or south. It was a voice that was not supposed to exist, and yet it filled his ear as though spoken directly to him. He turned quickly, scanning the crowd. His eyes swept over women weighing saffron, over merchants weighing silver coins, over a child balancing a jug of water on his head. Then he saw him, a boy no older than himself, standing utterly still beside a stall of dried figs. His lips moved, but no sound should have reached Ilyas. Still, he heard it as if the boy were whispering inside his skull. The boy's eyes were pale, so pale they seemed to hold a reflection of the sky, even though the sky was hidden behind awnings and smoke. When their gazes met, Ilyas felt something shift, as if the ground beneath the market had tilted. The boy spoke again, and Ilyas staggered. He could not understand the words, not truly, yet somehow he felt them. They were heavier than speech, as if each sound was carrying the memory of something older than the stones of Kethra. Ilyas began, but the boy raised a finger to his lips. Then, without a sound, he slipped into the press of the crowd and was gone. For the rest of the day, Ilyas could not rid himself of the voice. He went about his duties, carrying baskets of olives for his mother, fetching water from the well, but the whisper threaded itself through everything. At night, when he lay in the small room above his father's workshop, he could still hear it, lingering like smoke after a fire. It was not simply noise, it was meaning, pressing at the edges of his mind, demanding to be remembered. Sleep came late, and with it came dreams. He saw cities of glass rising above deserts, towers shaped like spirals of bone, rivers whose water carried letters instead of fish. Everywhere people spoke the same strange language, their mouths shaping sounds that filled the air like wings. When he woke, the words were still on his tongue, though he could not speak them aloud. Days passed. The boy did not return to the market, but Ilyas could not forget. His friends laughed at him when he spoke of it. Voices? In the market? Perhaps you were only dizzy from the sun. But the whisper had been real, more real than the clamor of merchants. Even his father, who had little patience for imagination, frowned when Ilyas asked if he had ever heard of languages no one knew. Words are for trade, for prayers, for song, his father said gruffly. What use is a language? That belongs to no people? Yet Ilyas felt in his bones that it was not useless. It was dangerous, perhaps, but also necessary, like a key that could open a door no one else saw. A week later, in the late hours before dawn, Ilyas woke suddenly. The whisper was there again, but this time clearer, louder. It was not outside. It was inside the room. He sat up, his heart racing, and saw the pale-eyed boy standing in the corner where the moonlight fell through the shutter. The boy's lips moved, forming words that should not have existed, and Ilyas felt his own lips tremble in response. He repeated them without knowing why, and the sound burned his throat as though the air itself resisted. The boy's expression softened. He stepped forward, placed a hand on Ilyas's shoulder, and said one last phrase. Then he was gone, vanishing as if he had never been there at all. Ilyas was left gasping in the dark, the strange syllables still alive on his tongue, and though he did not yet know what they meant, he felt certain of one thing: the world was about to change, and he alone had been chosen to walk a path no one else could see. For days after that night, Ilyas carried the strange syllables like embers hidden in his chest. They flared without warning, while he poured water into clay jugs, while he swept the dust from the workshop floor, even when he drifted into restless sleep. The words refused to be forgotten. At times he tried to force them out, whispering them into the empty air when no one was near, but the sound never seemed to escape his lips fully. It was as though the language resisted being heard, clinging instead to the space inside him, shaping his thoughts in ways he did not understand. He began to notice things. In the market, where once the clamor had been only noise, he started hearing faint patterns hidden beneath the ordinary tongues. An echo within an echo, like the faint hum of a string struck beneath the din of a drum. On the walls of the alleys, where cracks split the stone, he sometimes thought he saw shapes that resembled the curves of letters, though when he blinked, the lines dissolved back into meaningless fracture. Even the wind seemed to speak in fragments, carrying syllables that dissolved before they reached the ear. One evening, as the sun burned low and shadows stretched long across Kethra, Ilyas wandered farther from home than he ever had. His feet seemed drawn by an unseen pull, his steps guided by a whisper inside his skull. The streets narrowed into crooked passages he did not recognize, until he came upon a building older than the others, its stones darker, carved with markings worn nearly smooth by centuries. A half-ruined arch stood before him, its keystone broken, its gate sealed with rotting wood. He should have turned back, but the whispers urged him forward. He pushed at the gate, and the wood gave way with a groan of splinters. Inside, dust filled the air like a fog, and the scent of parchment long decayed clung to the stones. Shelves sagged against the walls, their scrolls gnawed by time and rats. At the center of the room lay a table, its surface carved with deep etchings that glimmered faintly in the last light of dusk. Ilyas approached, his breath shallow. The etchings were not like the writing of his people, nor of any traders he had ever seen. They curved and twisted in impossible forms, shapes that hurt his eyes if he stared too long. Yet as he gazed at them, the syllables he had heard from the boy stirred on his tongue, aligning themselves with the lines before him. He traced one symbol with his finger, and suddenly the carvings flared, not with fire, but with meaning. It was a map, not a map of lands he knew, not mountains or rivers or cities, but a map of words. Each symbol was a place, each curve a path, and at its center he saw a void, a hollow space that drew all the lines inward, a silence that bound the shapes together. The longer he looked, the more he realized the symbols were not static. They shifted subtly, like living things, rearranging themselves according to a logic he could not yet grasp. Then he heard it, a voice not from outside, but from within the very carvings. The language flowed again, and this time he answered without hesitation. The moment his voice touched the air, the dust swirled into patterns, forming streams of light that rose and hovered before him. For an instant he glimpsed landscapes not of this world, cities suspended in sky, forests of crystal, seas blacker than ink, and in each place, voices called in the same impossible tongue. He stumbled back, breaking the connection, and the visions vanished. His heart pounded as the dust settled, the glow fading until the carvings were once again only stone. Yet he knew what he had seen was no trick of the mind. The map was real. It was a guide, not of distance, but of meaning. Whoever had made it had woven language into geography, thought into terrain. As he tried to steady himself, he felt a presence behind him. He turned sharply, but the chamber was empty, save for a shadow that did not move with the fading light. The pale-eyed boy stood once more, though this time his form seemed half-drawn, as though he were no more than smoke shaped like flesh. His lips moved, and again Ilyas heard the impossible words, but they were clearer now, almost as if he understood them. "You have seen," the boy said. Or at least, that was what Ilyas's mind translated the impossible syllables into. "The map is not drawn to be read. It is drawn to be walked." Ilyas opened his mouth, but his throat tightened. Where does it lead?" The boy's pale eyes gleamed like water under the moon. To the place where silence becomes speech, to the beginning of all tongues, and to the end of them. The chamber shuddered as though the weight of those words had struck its stones. Then the boy was gone, dissolving back into dust and shadow. Ilyas sank to his knees, his hand still resting on the carvings. He felt the pull again. The map was not finished. It waited for him, demanded him, as though he were the missing word that could complete it. He knew then that the boy was right. He could not remain in Kethra. The language was calling him, and if he ignored it, it would devour him from within. Outside, night had fallen, and the stars burned sharp and cold above the city. Ilyas stared at them with new eyes, as if they too were letters in a script waiting to be read. Somewhere out there, beyond the walls of Kethra, beyond the sands and seas, lay the path inscribed within the map. And though he did not yet know its end, he knew he had no choice but to begin. Ilyas left Kethra before dawn, slipping past the northern gate while the guard still drowsed with sleep-heavy eyes. He carried little, only a skin of water, a pouch of dried figs, and the memory of the map burned into his mind. He did not tell his parents, nor his friends, nor anyone at all. Some part of him knew that even if he tried, they would never understand. The language was his burden alone, a key that only fit the lock of his own bones. The desert lay before him, wide and unbroken. The sands shifted under his feet, whispering with every step, as though mocking him with their dry tongues. He walked, for hours, guided by nothing more than the pull of the unseen map, a thread woven deep inside him. At times he thought he heard footsteps behind him, but when he turned there was nothing, only his own shadow stretching long across the dunes. By nightfall, he found shelter among the ribs of a ruined caravan, its wooden beams half buried in sand. He lay beneath the stars, and once again the syllables stirred on his lips, unbidden. This time, however, the stars themselves seemed to respond. Constellations shifted subtly, their patterns bending into shapes that mirrored the carvings he had seen. He realized then that the map was not only stone and dust, it was etched into the very sky. Days passed. The heat of the sun tore at him, and his water dwindled. Yet whenever despair crept close, the whisper of the language returned, filling him with a strange strength. It was not comfort exactly, but necessity, as though the words themselves sustained him. He began to suspect that if he truly surrendered to them, he might no longer need food or drink at all. On the seventh night, when the moon was thin and low, he came upon a valley carved into the earth like a wound. At its center stood a gate. Not a city gate, nor a gate of wood or iron, but a structure of stone so vast and ancient it seemed less built than born. 2 pillars rose from the ground, etched with the same impossible script, and between them hung an archway of empty air. No wall enclosed it. No building stood beyond it. The gate opened onto nothing. And yet, as Ilyas drew near, the nothingness shimmered. It quivered like heat rising from stone, then deepened into shadows, until he thought he saw the faint outlines of streets, towers, and doorways flickering on the other side. Whispers filled the valley, voices overlapping in hundreds of tones, speaking the same impossible language. Some were sharp as broken glass, others soft as falling ash. Together, they formed a chorus that pulled at him like a tide. He fell to his knees, clutching his head. The voices pressed into his skull, 1,000 syllables clamoring for recognition. He felt as though he were drowning in them, each word a wave crashing inside him. Then, through the storm, one voice rose clear, the voice of the pale-eyed boy. Ilyas. The sound cut through everything, and the others fell silent. He raised his head, and there the boy stood, framed within the empty archway. His form was more solid now, less like smoke but still fragile, as though the world struggled to hold him. His eyes gleamed with that strange pale fire, and when he spoke, the words struck with the weight of stone. "This is the gate of forgotten echoes," the boy said, though again the syllables were not truly his own language. They were simply what Ilyas's mind made of them. Every word lost to the world finds its way here. Every tongue that no longer has a voice lingers in its shadow. Step through and you will hear them all. Ilyas's mouth was dry. Why me? Why must I hear them? Because you already do. The gate pulsed, the air within it thickening, shadows twisting into clearer shapes, streets, doorways, entire worlds layered upon one another like sheets of glass. For a moment, Ilyas thought he could see people moving there, speaking tongues that had long since died, their words glowing as they left their mouths. Fear gripped him. To step through would be to lose himself. He could feel it already, the pull of countless voices eager to pour into him, to use him as their vessel. And yet, beneath the fear, another feeling stirred. Inevitability. He had not come this far. To turn back. The boy reached out a hand, his pale fingers beckoning. You are the traveler of the language that should not exist. If you remain, it will consume you. If you walk through, it will remake you. The desert wind rose, hurling sand across the valley. The gate loomed before him, vast and hungry. Ilyas took a step, then another. His heart pounded, and with each beat the strange syllables pulsed in his chest, demanding to be spoken. At the threshold, he opened his mouth and let them pour out. The raw gate answered. The air split with a sound like the tearing of fabric, and the shadows deepened into solidity. A flood of voices surged over him, but now, instead of crushing, they lifted him, carrying him forward. He felt himself dissolve, his body unraveling into words, until he was no longer walking, but becoming. For a breathless moment, he was nowhere, and everywhere. He stood at the heart of echoes, a place where time and silence intertwined. The voices pressed against him, not with violence now, but with yearning, as though they longed to be remembered. His bones were ink, his veins threads of script. And in the vastness of that place he realized the truth. He was no longer only Ilyas. He was becoming the tongue itself. The boy's voice reached him once more, softer now, almost tender. Welcome, traveler. The journey has only begun. When Ilyas stepped through the gate of forgotten echoes, the world he entered was not one of earth and sky, but of silence shaped into form. At first, he thought he had gone deaf. The rush of voices that had drowned him vanished, leaving behind a stillness so absolute it pressed against his skin like stone. Then his eyes adjusted, and he saw the silent lands. The ground stretched wide and pale, like parchment unmarked by ink. Towers of glassy crystal rose in the distance, bending light into fractured rainbows that had no sound. Rivers flowed, but they made no murmur, no ripple, as though water itself had forgotten how to speak. Even the air seemed weightless, absent of the faint hum of existence. It was a world without echo, and yet he felt words suspended within it, like seeds waiting beneath soil. He tried to speak, but no sound left his lips, the syllables that had lived in him since the market burned to escape. But here they remained, trapped, fluttering inside his chest like birds against a cage. Panic surged through him. Had the silence stolen his voice? Had he crossed the gate only to lose the very thing that defined him? Then, as though answering his fear, the pale-eyed boy appeared once more, standing at the crest of a dune that gleamed like powdered bone. He did not move his mouth, but his voice filled Ilyas's mind. Here, words are not spoken, they are walked. Ilyas blinked. Walked? The thought was clumsy, half-formed, but it reached outward like a hand in the dark. The boy nodded. He pointed to the ground, where faint lines glowed, crisscrossing the pale surface like veins beneath skin. They stretched in every direction, some curving into spirals, others branching like roots. Each line pulsed faintly, and as Ilyas looked closer, he saw that they were not mere markings. They were letters. Every path was a sentence, every crossing a word. This is the landscape of silence, the boy said. Here, language is not bound to tongues or air. It shapes the land, and the land remembers it. Ilyas hesitated, then stepped onto one of the glowing paths. At once, a vibration shivered through his bones. The syllables inside him stirred, aligning with the line beneath. His feet. With each step, he felt a fragment of meaning bloom, like petals opening in the dark. Though he could not hear it, he understood it. as if the act of walking itself had spoken. He moved slowly, tracing the line until it curved into a circle. The circle pulsed once, and in his mind, an image flared. A woman weaving baskets by a river, her lips moving in a language no longer spoken on earth. The vision dissolved, leaving behind only the ache of memory. Ilyas staggered back. They're alive. The boy's pale gaze was steady. Every word lost to time lingers here, preserved in silence. You walk them, and they live again, if only for a breath. Ilyas spent hours, or perhaps days. Time did not flow the same here, wandering the paths. Each one carried him into another life, another fragment of existence. He tasted honey from a jar in a city long crumbled, smelled the smoke of fires lit for gods no one worshipped, felt the heartbeat of a child who had died centuries ago. Each vision was fleeting, but each left its mark on him, until he was layered with lives, a vessel heavy with echoes. Yet not all paths were gentle. Some lines burned cold, leading him into shadows of pain. He walked through battles where soldiers cried out in tongues that vanished with their dying breath. He felt the last words of mothers whispered to infants who would never remember them. He entered villages where plague had swept through, leaving only silence that stretched forever. These words clung to him, heavy and sharp, cutting deeper than any wound. At last, he collapsed upon the pale ground, trembling. His mind reeled with the weight of thousands of voices. The boy appeared again, kneeling beside him. You see now why you were chosen, the boy said. The world does not know it, but without a vessel, these words will rot. They will fester in silence until nothing remains. You must carry them, or they will vanish. Ilyas's throat ached, though he had not spoken. Why me? Why not you? The boy's expression flickered, almost sorrowful. Because I am already only an echo. I cannot leave these lands. I am bound to what has been forgotten. But you, your tongue, your breath, they still belong to the world. You can carry what should not exist into what still does. Ilyas looked at his hands. They trembled, veins faintly glowing with letters that writhed beneath his skin. He feared them, feared the weight of what he had already taken in, and yet a deeper fear grew in him, that if he turned away, if he refused, these voices would vanish forever. And with them, the memory of all those who had once spoken them. The silence pressed around him, not oppressive now, but waiting. The paths shimmered, countless and endless, stretching beyond the horizon. He understood then that his journey was not about reaching a place, but about carrying a burden no one else could. The boy stood, extending his hand. Come. There is one last path you must walk. Beyond it lies the final tongue. Ilyas rose on unsteady legs, feeling the silence stir like breath around him. Ahead, a single line blazed brighter than the rest, a thread of fire woven into the pale ground. It pulsed like a heartbeat, steady, insistent. And though his body trembled with exhaustion, Ilyas knew he had no choice. He set his foot upon the final path, and the silent lands opened before him. The path burned beneath Ilyas's feet, a thread of living light that guided him across the silent lands. Each step carried a weight heavier than the last. Voices pressed against his mind like tides, memories of languages long dead vibrating through his veins. He had walked countless words, countless lives, and now he felt the pull of the final tongue. It was not simply a language, he realized. It was the root of all language, the origin of sound and meaning, the heartbeat from which every word ever spoken had grown. The air thickened, shimmered, and then parted into a great hall that existed without walls, suspended between silence and light. The hall seemed endless, stretching farther than eyes could see, yet intimate, as if it recognized the smallest tremor of his pulse. At its center hovered a sphere of pure radiance, and from within it came the sound of a single voice, a voice that was not voice, a word that was not word, yet somehow carried the essence of all tongues. Ilyas approached, his steps trembling. The sphere pulsed in response, resonating with the syllables he had carried for so long. He opened his mouth, and the language poured forth, not in fragments this time, but as a single, cohesive current. It filled the hall, twisting and turning, shaping itself into bridges of meaning. Every syllable he spoke became a thread, connecting the echoes he had gathered along his journey. Lives long forgotten began to hum with awareness, each whisper harmonizing with the one tongue he now channeled. The pale-eyed boy appeared beside him, a shadow now softened, less separate, more like a reflection in the flowing light. "You are ready," he said. "You have carried the weight, borne the voices, and become the vessel. But this tongue, it does not belong to you alone. Speak it, and it will reshape what remains of the world." Ilyas swallowed, the sound of the sphere thrumming in tandem with his heartbeat. He had feared this moment, feared that to speak the last tongue would destroy him, consume him entirely. But he felt something deeper than fear now, understanding. This tongue was not just a language. It was life itself, memory itself, the thread that connected what had been with what still was. To speak it was not to dominate, but to give form to all that would otherwise be lost. He let it flow, and the hall shivered. Light spread like water across the void, illuminating unseen corners, revealing threads of existence that had long been frayed. The voices of the silent lands joined him, weaving themselves into harmony. A mother whispered to a child who had died centuries ago. A scholar murmured words of knowledge long erased from history. A poet sang stanzas that had never found ears to hear them. All of them, every forgotten word, every lost syllable, found resonance in the last tongue. Time itself seemed to bend. Moments layered upon moments, past and present folding into one. Ilyas felt the weight of every step he had taken, every vision he had endured, but it no longer crushed him. Instead, it flowed through him, a river of memory and sound, making him not just a traveler, but a keeper, a bridge between worlds. Then, as the final syllable left his lips, the sphere expanded, encompassing the hall, the silent lands, and the edges of memory itself. For a fleeting instant, Ilyas saw the entirety of the world, not only Kethra, not only the lands he had crossed, but all lands and lives, living and dead, present and forgotten. Every tongue, every whisper, every song and prayer and secret thought, connected in an infinite lattice of meaning. The pale-eyed boy touched his shoulder lightly. "Now you are both the traveler and the map," he said. "The world remembers through you." Ilyas closed his eyes, feeling the pulse of the last tongue settle into him, into his bones and blood, into the marrow of his mind. He understood. At last, the language that should not exist had existed all along, not to vanish, but to endure through him. And though the burden was immense, it was also a gift, a chance to preserve what was precious and fragile, the lifeblood of thought and memory. When he opened his eyes again, the hall had vanished. He stood on a plain of quiet light. The silent lands behind him folded into memory. The wind carried no sound, yet every step he took now resonated with the voices he had gathered. The world outside waited, real, tangible, flawed, but no longer silent. And Ilyas walked forward, knowing that he would speak what must be spoken, carry what must be carried, and ensure that even the languages lost to time would never truly vanish. Somewhere, far beyond the horizon, the pale-eyed boy's form dissolved entirely into the radiance of the last tongue. Ilyas felt the pull of a new path before him, a journey that would never truly end, for words never cease to move, never cease to live, and never cease to call to those who are willing to listen. And so he walked, the traveler of a language that does not exist in the world, yet because of him, now existed everywhere.